So at this point, you should have all of the details added to your portrait. You should have some highlights, shadows outlined, and all of those refining details done. This last video is going to show you some different ways to make your portrait your own and really go above and beyond with things. When you were looking at some of these original portraits on the PowerPoint, each of them has a way that makes it unique or different. So start thinking about how you want to make yours unique or different, and I'm going to show you a couple of different options here. But some of these have just circles that kind of draw that attention and focus in towards the focal point of the portrait with different colors. So that's one idea as we're looking through these. Some of them have some different designs in the background. So maybe instead of a circle that your portrait's in, you're creating an abstract shape with the pen tool. And then creating some just simple designs within that. Could be something else. And if you do something like this with maybe leaves or flowers behind your portrait, think about maybe finding a picture online that you could potentially use to trace. Something different with this image is how they used that circle around the outside and then almost cut out part of the portrait that's going beyond the circle, making the circle just kind of come behind the face here as well. And not only that, but they used more of a darker outline around some of the darker shadows versus just using the eyedropper tool. So you could consider using just a black outline in some of the areas of your portrait as well. And then these used abstract colors. So when you're looking at this one, there's actually a texture in the hair, which I will show you one idea for how to do that. And then there's also every highlight and shadow is a purple tone. So I'll show you how to change the colors up. And then maybe just consider using different shapes, different colors. This one again is more just black and white, and then they use the color of the eye as the background. So that's another interesting direction to take this. So again, be creative. First thing I want to show you is adding just a simple circle or shape to your background. So the shape tools are up at the top. I'm going to click on the ellipse tool, and I'm just going to click and drag across the image here to create a circle. And then I'm going to choose a color to fill it with. And obviously it's covering the picture right now, so I want that in the back. So I'm going to click with 2 fingers, go to Arrange, and then Send to Back. If you have your layers in different orders, you can click on the layer and drag and drop it below as well as another option. So there's that. You can play around with the colors. The next thing I want to show you is adding a texture somewhere in the image, and then we'll look at kind of changing up colors as well. But once you do have your circle or shape, if you're going to add that, or even just a simple square for a background color, think about again if there's any designs or anything that you want to draw or add to the background that you could work with. So as a texture though, I just went to Google and I Google searched texture and I picked one out. I clicked with 2 fingers, I saved the image, and then I'm going to come back over here and go to File, and then Import, Place Image. And then I'm going to find where that texture saved to my desktop, and I'm going to add it on here. And then I'm going to actually use this texture as more of a background, so behind the circle. So I'm just going to extend this out to the outside of my image here. And I'm going to right-click, Arrange, Send to Back. At this point I have a nice background now with that texture, but I'm going to take my circle and down with the blending modes where it says normal by the color, I'm going to click on that and hit multiply, and that's going to blend my circle with my background texture just to add a little bit of texture to that circle, which could be something interesting. With the circle, maybe I could also play around with using more of a radial gradient. So that's where that color is coming from the inside to the outside. So maybe instead of black, I could change that to an orange color, or maybe a blue, and just kind of play around with the coloring of the image and how that looks. So that's another option, or something else to play around with is using these gradients. But I'm going to undo that and just leave it as the circle here. And then you could also think about maybe playing around with multiply or blending some parts of the picture. So maybe the shirt I can change to multiply and have that so that the texture kind of shows through. Um, or maybe part of the hair I can change to multiply, or even trying out different blending modes. So that's something to think about. The other thing I want to show you here is playing around with the color. So maybe on your portrait you don't want it to be skin color. Maybe you want to play around with different values and different colors within this. So I'm going to start with just this background layer with the skin. And I'm going to go to my colors here, and I'm going to pick maybe an orange. And then once you choose the orange or the color, you can change how light or dark something is. So I would try to keep it kind of consistent with that value of the skin tone. So this is more of a medium value, so I'm going to find something that's somewhere in between the dark and the light values, maybe somewhat desaturated as well. And then I could maybe play around with the hair and change the fill for the hair and keep that as an orange value as well. So maybe this brighter orange. And then I could look at some of those highlights and maybe make those a brighter orange or even a yellow. So I would definitely try to find or pick colors that are going to work well together if you go this route. I would not do something that is too much. So you don't want to do lots and lots of colors, otherwise it's going to take away from your image. So try to keep it cohesive, pick colors that are going to really work well together. Something else that you can play around with is adding texture to just individualized areas. So something like this where the hair has that kind of star texture on it. So I'm going to come back over here and choose an area to add a texture to. So I'm just going to choose this background section of hair. And where you added the fill, I'm going to click on that and then click on the color fill at the top. And then there's a couple different options. So again, you can try out gradients, different things here. But I'm just going to click on the texture fill. And this has different textures that you can add to your image. If you decide to use a texture fill, you would need to, again, download some different textures from your computer here. So pick out some that could be interesting. So maybe something like this where there's plants or again the stars. Try a few different things out. But then you can just click choose image and you can choose a texture to add into that part of the image. So I just chose that same texture I was using on the background with the hair here, and that added into that. You can also work on the size or how the texture is set up. So right now I have this set to tile, so it's actually using, if I shrink this down, lots of smaller sections of that image tiled together. So that could be something interesting to play around with as well. And then you can also play around with opacity, changing the size of it, position. But when you're done, you can click off of that. So be creative again with how you're putting your image together. Next thing I want to show you is just one more option of how to actually put your final image together that's a little bit different from this if you wanted to kind of take a different approach to putting together your image. But here's an example of a more abstract photo that you could work with maybe different colors right off the bat and having your different shapes set to multiply. So here's how I did that. Here's the image that was used for it. And I'm just using the pen tool, and instead of outlining everything first and filling everything with color, you can start out by just outlining highlights and shadows. So for example, on the nose here, I can outline this shadow part of the nose. And then for the fill, come over here. Instead of using the eyedropper tool, I'm just clicking on different colors, but trying to keep it consistent so you don't want too many different colors. So maybe just stick to like blues and purples and different highlights and shadow values of those. But since this was a darker area, I'm going to try to use a darker blue. And then I'm going to come over here and change my blending mode to multiply. And then I did keep an outline around it, so that could be something to either keep or hide as you go. You can kind of make those adjustments. but I'm overlapping as well. So multiply will make those areas see-through. So you can see with this purple, I just went right over top of that highlight and filled that in. So when you're done and you hide that background image, you can see where those colors overlap for the nose here. But again, here's what that finished example looked like. It had a texture, or it had a texture picture added on top of it as well. But as far as your practice image goes of this boy here, you can choose however you want to kind of finalize it. So pick at least one thing to work with. So maybe adding a background shape with a texture, or maybe changing the color of the face, adding a texture to just the background, or maybe some different parts of it. But pick something that you think might be interesting to try for your final image, and I want you to practice that on this just to see how it looks. And then when you're finished with this image, still save it as a Gravit file, so save to the cloud, but also save or export it as a JPEG, and then this image you will be submitting onto the practice portrait on Classroom and get that turned in. And then you can go ahead and move on to your final image when you're ready. Make sure that you did take those three images that you're going to be working with for your final portrait. Really think about that lighting. Make sure that you think about having that lamp or some sort of light off to the side so you can easily see areas of highlights and shadows. That's going to make your job a lot easier when you go to put everything together.